Hi, I'm Susanna and this is my December reading wrap-up. There are 5 books here, but I actually finished 8 books in December. Let's start with the last book in Shadow and Bone trilogy, Ruin and Rising by Leigh Bardugo. This is a young adult fantasy. You can find my review of the first 2 books in the trilogy in my November reading wrap-up. The Sun Summoner Alina Starkov and the remnants of the once great Grisha army are forced into hiding as the Darkling has claimed the throne of Ravka. She must find the elusive Firebird if she wants to have a chance to defeat him. But as she learns more about her power, she has to choose whether claiming it will truly be worth it. I was simultaneously excited and hesitant to read the final book in this trilogy. I wasn't perfectly satisfied with Shadow and Bone and Siege and Storm, but I did give both of them 4.5 stars for the potential they showed. When I started reading Ruin and Rising, it seemed that that potential was finally coming to fruition. There was action, the pacing was better than in the previous book, stuff happened, I was loving it, until the ending happened. That means that I have to talk about the ending, so spoilers ahead. Throughout the book, Alina continues to toy with darkness, but at no point is there a real danger of her fully going to the dark side. It might have made the book more interesting if that had happened and the series had had a redemption arc. After reading this book, I do think the second book was unnecessary and this series would have worked better as a duology. Okay, now to the ending. There's a huge final battle against the Darkling and Alina loses her power. I've claimed before that love triangle is my least favorite trope, but I lied. This is my least favorite trope. Frankly, the ending made me angry. And it's not because the ending wasn't fitting, it was. I understand why the book ends the way it does, but I just do not like it. The lessons Alina learns are important, but I do think there would have been a way for Alina to both learn her lessons and to keep her powers. I don't care how well the lessons Alina learns fit the themes of the novel, I just do not like the idea of women losing their power. Especially not if the love interest she ends up with has continually expressed his dislike for her powers. Because Mal continued to be a problem in this book as well. Now, unlike a lot of other readers, I actually did like Mal. For the most part, he was kind and loyal. But he was also insecure and felt threatened by Alina's power, and even though in the end he claimed that he never wanted Alina to lose her powers, it felt disingenuous. At least he lost his tracking ability as well, if that's any consolation. I would have liked this book a lot better if instead of Alina losing her powers, the insecure guy had grown up and not been threatened by a powerful woman anymore. This is fantasy after all. So, unfortunately, I cannot recommend this series, especially not to teenage girls. I'm giving this book 3 stars for the action and the side characters, but otherwise this book was a huge disappointment. I do hope Six of Crows duology lives up to the hype though, because I really did enjoy the world building in this series. I read 2 fiction books during the Christmas break when I was at my mother's, but since they were from her bookshelf, I don't have the physical copies of those books. The first was a historical fiction, The Nightingale by Kristin Hannah. Interestingly, I actually recommended this book to my mother without knowing anything about it. I had just seen it on Bookstagram and knew that people loved it. It turned out to be a good recommendation because my mother loved that book, so I was eager to read it myself and I loved it as well. The Nightingale is a historical fiction novel set in France during the Second World War. Vianne Morirac only wants to survive and protect her daughter, even if that means becoming friends with the enemy. Her headstrong little sister Isabelle Rossignol, on the other hand, joins the resistance and becomes the Nightingale. She rescues Allied soldiers and helps them out from the occupied France. This was a moving and at times harrowing story of the lives of women in Nazi-occupied France during the World War II. I loved both of the main characters and understood why they both acted the way they did. This book made me think how I would react in the situation they were in. There were a few minor plot holes, such as what happened to the Jewish family they rescued in Paris, but all in all, this was a great read. I gave it solid 5 stars and it made my top 3 reads of 2024. If you're looking for a great historical fiction novel, I highly recommend this book. The third fiction book I read was Fänrikki Stålin Tarinat, translated into English as The Tales of Ensign Stål by Johan Ludvig Runeberg, the national poet of Finland. This is an epic poem published originally in Swedish in 1848 and 1860. It narrates the events of the war between Sweden and Russia in 1808 to 1809. It's an important part of Finnish literary history and includes, among other poems, the lyrics to the Finnish national hymn. That was pretty much the only reason why I wanted to read this book. The poems are full of patriotic war propaganda and I got tired of it and the old-fashioned style of the Finnish translation quite soon. Not necessarily a pleasurable read, but I'm glad I've read it now. I also finished 5 non-fiction books in December. 2 of them were writing guides. I'm hoping that these 2 will help me with the line edits of Project Prehistory. June Casagrande's Eve was the best of sentences, Eve was the worst of sentences was a great and funny guide to English grammar. The book addresses grammatical issues such as subordination, sentence length, adverbs and participles, relative clauses and prepositional phrases, and passive voice in a clear and understandable way. This is a must-have guide for every writer. Even if you don't like grammar, I highly recommend this book. I learned a lot from it and the writing style made this an enjoyable read. The second writing guide was Editing Fiction at Sentence Level by Louise Hornby. This wasn't as enjoyable reading experience as Casagrande's book, but it's nevertheless full of useful information for writers preparing to self-edit their texts. The book addresses a large array of issues ranging from point of view, head hopping, filter words, accent beats, and adverbs to dialogue and punctuation. My one minor issue with this book was that the majority of the examples came from crime novels. Since that's not my preferred genre, I would have loved to see examples from other genres as well. As it was, now every time there was an example, I was reluctant to read it because I knew I wasn't going to enjoy it. But this is probably just my problem and it definitely did not detract from the quality of the advice. The other 3 non-fiction books were in Finnish. I finally finished my high school Finnish handbook. I also read a book about birds in Finland and Europe. The third was a library book. It was National Geographic's City Guide to Paris. And here are the books I'm planning to read in January. I'm starting the year with a low and manageable goal. I want to finish 2 books and start reading 2 books that I will finish in February. This will give me more time to focus on Project Prehistory. But I'll talk more about my reading and writing goals for 2025 in my upcoming videos. The first book I'm reading is Hajustentekijän tytär by Kaisa Åkerman. This is a historical fiction set in ancient Assyria, and it hasn't been translated into English, at least not yet. This has over 600 pages, so I will not be finishing this in January, but I'll finish this in early February. The second book I want to read is The Power by Naomi Alderman. I'm hoping that since this book is about a world where women have the power, it might work as a comp title for Project Prehistory, but we'll see what happens. The third book I want to start in January is Caraval by Stephanie Garber. This is the first book of Caraval trilogy. I also want to read 1 non-fiction book in January. This is Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex, Part 1. I will start Part 2 in February. So those are the books I read in December and my plans for January. What is the first book you're reading this year? Let me know in the comments and I'll see you in my next video.